Hello, welcome to Sound and Fairy Book Reviews. As usual, I am Tina. Today I'm doing a book review of Netherford Hall by Natania Barron. This is a romance in a fantasy setting. I'm not sure if it counts as romantasy, I don't really know. From Rebellion that's coming out August 13th, I guess that is today. I received this arc from NetGalley in exchange for a fair review. This book has a lot going on. It's a fantasy, a Pride and Prejudice adaptation, an LGBTQ plus romance. Does it have almost too much going on? Perhaps. What is it about? After a mysterious fire at their home in Regency, London, displaces gentle witch Edith Rockwood and her now much reduced family to their ancestral street of Netherford Hall in Kent, she faces a new threat in the form of her tenant, the chaotic and lovely Poppy Brewell. The repairs on the old pile are prohibitive, Edith's standing is uncertain, and her inheritance has been challenged by a forgotten American branch of the family. It is clear she needs to marry, soon and wisely, but the lively girl from Harrow House generally comes to occupy all her thoughts. As tenants, rivals, suitors, and enemies start to circle Netherford, and dark secrets about both women's pasts come to light, Edith and Poppy must confront what it means to fight for love and family and to be their authentic selves. Sounds fun, eh? Pride and Prejudice, which is why I'm wearing my What Excellent Boiled Potato shirt again, because it's Pride and Prejudice themed. I talked about this before. Anyway. So while I found the first third of this book rather quaint and quite cute and fun, the last two thirds I just wasn't as into. Now, I was in the hospital when I was reading this, so perhaps I wasn't as engaged due to that. Why was I in the hospital? Well, where I live, there was a recall on the Silk brand of milk products, like almond milk and etc., and oatmeal and oat milk, things like that. And I ended up drinking about half of a carton before I received notice of the recall. And then a few weeks later, I started to feel kind of like very tired, like extremely tired. And then a few days later, I had stomach upset a little bit. And then I got this like super bad headache, and I rarely get headaches. And then I got this pain in my neck, and I was like, what is this? So I looked it up, and apparently those are symptoms of listeria that you should go to the hospital for. Called my doctor. My doctor's away on vacation. The receptionist said, go to the hospital. So I went to the hospital. I was at the hospital for 9 hours, waiting to be seen. Yay. It turns out they didn't say I had listeria or listeriosis, but they did say they were worried about meningitis. They took a bunch of blood, they did some cultures, my lactates were low, I had to go in an IV, and then I finally got to go home. It was not a fun day, so that might have contributed to my opinions about this book, because I was reading it to try and distract myself while I was in the hospital. When I go to the hospital, because I hate going to the hospital, I'd rather die in the ditch, I bring a backpack full of my tablet, a bunch of chargers, my computer, my 3 books. I bring as much stuff as I possibly can, and I still have a terrible time. Anyway, my woes aside, if you want a queer normative take on Pride and Prejudice that is still set in a fantastical Regency period, you will likely really enjoy this. Yet, in order to get to this kind of queer normative place and still have a Regency setting, the book pulls some interesting world building out of its hat. It's basically the Regency if A, sexism, homophobia, racism, and the patriarchy didn't exist, B, primogeniture wasn't really in effect, and C, magic existed. I totally get why this has to happen to make the story enjoyably queer without having to address homophobia, because that's never fun. So if you love the time period but want to see more gay people, you'll really enjoy this aspect. I definitely did like that part. And here's me becoming pedantic. So primogeniture is the whole sons can inherit estates but women can't system, which was the norm in order to keep the family name bloodline intact when passing down property and titles. Women were generally provided for, and that when the dad died, he'd will any daughters and his wife, if she's outlived him, some money to live on, but generally they were beholden to their male relatives to keep them housed and fed and etc., or to their husband, which is why the mother in Pride and Prejudice is so obsessed with getting her daughters married well. She needs someone to marry rich to keep herself and her 4 daughters from basically the poorhouse. When it comes to adoption, often because of the whole bloodlines thing, adopted kids were left out of inheriting estates and titles. But because this novel has a world building where women can inherit and queer people can marry, primogeniture can't exist. Because, as you know, 2 women can't make a baby. Therefore, the central tension of Pride and Prejudice, gotta marry those daughters off so we don't starve, can't exist in this story. Either way, the author invents, using the magic system, another issue that the family has to deal with. Does this work in terms of plot? Yes, it totally does work. But it does make me wonder why we needed the Regency period element at all. Like, why not just forego that very strict, specific time period and make it a fantasy romance that is kind of inspired by Pride and Prejudice instead of doing like an adaptation? The magic system also isn't explained in enough detail for me, at least in regards to how it's incorporated into the Regency world. When did this magic come about? How is it tied to the crown? If vampires exist who can live for hundreds of years, how does that impact marriages of convenience, that were done mainly to merge families and lands? If the story hadn't been set in Regency England and instead set in another world or something not so closely married to reality, I wouldn't have any of these questions. But because I'm very well versed in the time period, given I focused on it in university, I was a little bit like, what about this? What about that? I warned you I was going to be pedantic. You should have just stopped watching. Is this likely something most readers won't care about? Probably, given how many people seem to enjoy Bridgerton, but I still felt I needed to explain my lackluster reaction to the world building to be polite, I guess, instead of just saying I didn't like it. I was kind of I'm trying to explain it, so it's not like I'm attacking the book, because I'm not. I think a lot of people will really like this book. In terms of the prose, this book reads in a way that feels like it's trying to mimic a more formal writing style, in that we're given a kind of like overhead view of everything. If you've read any actual Austen, Bronte, Gaskell, etc., you know what I'm talking about. I enjoyed this actually, as it gave a bit of oomph to the time period aspect. The characters are, despite being well formed, a little bit hard to bond with though because of this, because we're kind of watching everything from afar. This definitely ties into my reaction to the romances, which, unfortunately, were like my course schedules in university. They lacked chemistry. Like in Pride and Prejudice, we have multiple romances in the novel, but unlike in P&P, they are all very much insta-love. Even the two main characters, who stand in for Darcy and Elizabeth, pretty much want to jump each other from the first meeting. Because we get Edith's perspective, we don't get Darcy's in Pride and Prejudice, we are told rather than shown her affection for Poppy. There's basically just lots of musings on how hot she is, basically. And the two don't really have any witty conversations to produce the tension that we got with Elizabeth and Darcy. I'm not trying to be mean, but it felt to me like the complexity of Elizabeth and Darcy was reduced here to a basic grumpy sunshine trope. Thing is, people love their tropes. I love the grumpy sunshine trope. I was on board for the relationship. I just didn't ship it madly, I guess I'm trying to say. I didn't think it was bad. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying the reason I'm not giving this book 5 stars is because for me it didn't blow me away, but it was enjoyable, and I did hope they got together, you know what I mean? I wasn't oh, I hate these two. I just didn't find that their relationship was as tantalizing as it could have been for me. Now, in Pride and Prejudice, yes, we do have insta-love with Bingley and Jane, but that also ties very much into the Darcy and Elizabeth plot. They are very, very intertwined. In Netherford, we don't have that dependent plot line, so all the romances are separate from one another. It also felt like the other romances developed after one conversation. There was no real tension between the other kind of side romances. In fact, I found that they kind of bogged things down. If they were looking, it seems like this book is going to be part of a series. So I think it would have made more sense to kind of maybe just hint at these other relationships instead of kind of building them in a very small way in this book. I don't know. Anyway, I suppose my main issue with the book, and this is a me thing, probably more than a book thing, is that I think I would have preferred if it would have been a direct Pride and Prejudice adaptation, following the same themes and basic plot line with just a queer element, or dropped that altogether and just been a queer fantasy grumpy sunshine romance set in a Regency-like setting, as opposed to trying to force Regency to fit queer fantasy. As I said, I'm not trying to tear this book down at all. I think a lot of people will really enjoy it. I think you should give it a chance, especially if you love Pride and Prejudice and you love romantasy. I think this is more of a me thing. I'm just so incredibly picky when it comes to that time period. I had really high hopes for this one because I love queer retellings. It just didn't land for me. But if you want magic, lesbians, a manor house, a small town, vampires, and some diversity, do check this book out. It is fun. Maybe the love stories will work better for you. As you know, if you follow my channel, I don't read a ton of romance anyway, so the romance really has to hit hard for me to really love it. I tend to be I understand now why people give romances like 3 or 5. They don't tend to go little 4s because I think we all have different preferences, and when it comes to romance, I think that's the most subjective preference that you can have. So, yeah. That is my review of Netherford Hall. I do appreciate the e-arc. Thank you so much to the publisher for giving it to me. If the author checks this out, please don't take this review to heart. I do think that you are a great writer, and I will probably check out something else you wrote. This one just didn't land for me, and that is okay. I really hope other people go check it out. So thank you very much, and catch you later.